When is Superman Superman? Would you have saved Wilson? What does it mean to be a person? In metaphysical discourse, the substance view holds that entities belong to kinds defined by essential properties. A Kryptonian, for instance, is said to possess powers such as flight and superstrength. These powers are considered intrinsic to the kind, even if not always manifested. Yet this view encounters friction when applied to narrative figures like Superman. His powers are latent, contingent upon environmental activation, specifically exposure to a yellow sun. Without this trigger, the powers remain dormant. The kind alone does not guarantee manifestation. This raises a deeper question. Is Superman still Superman if he never enters the activating context? Is Superman intrinsically Superman, or is he recursively Superman? From a narrative standpoint, Superman is not merely a biological entity. He is a symbolic threshold, a role that emerges through relational activation. His identity is constructed not only by what he is, but by where he is, what he encounters, and how he responds. The yellow sun, Earth's ethical landscape, and human relationality form the conditions under which Superman becomes Superman. Thus, identity in this framework is not static, it is relational and emergent. The powers may be latent, but the role is activated. Without the environmental shift, the Kryptonian remains a potentiality, not yet the narrative figure recognized as Superman. This critique suggests that a centralized substance view may be overly descriptive, cataloging potential without accounting for activation. Too general, assuming kind membership is sufficient for identity. A more dynamic model emerges. Kind, Kryptonian, biological essence. Threshold, exposure to yellow sun activation condition. Role, Superman, narrative identity. This tripartite model distinguishes between what something is, what activates it, and what it becomes. It allows for latency without loss of essence, activation without essential change, and identity as a relational emergence, not a static inheritance. In broader philosophical terms, this invites a shift from essentialism to threshold ontology, where beings are understood not only by their internal properties, but by the conditions under which they cross into recognizable roles. Superman, then, is not merely born, he is activated, contextualized, and narrated into being. If Superman is intrinsically Superman, then his Supermanness is a fixed essence. Kryptonian biology. Born Kal-El. His powers stem from his alien physiology under Earth's yellow sun. Moral compass. Raised by the Kents, his ethical framework is stable, compassionate, and justice-oriented. Symbolic fixity. He is the archetype of the hero, truth, justice, and the idealized protector. Superman's identity, beyond powers, beyond place. If Superman is recursively Superman, then his identity is performative and emergent. He becomes Superman through repeated acts of heroism, moral decisions, and relational trust. Each rescue, each ethical dilemma, each refusal to dominate even when he could reaffirms and reconstitutes his Supermanness. His identity is relational and iterative, not fixed but activated through narrative recursion. Let's reframe to see if Superman is intrinsically capable, but only recursively trustworthy. His essence gives him potential. His recursion gives him meaning. Superman's identity is not reducible to his powers, nor strictly tied to his location. While his powers are activated by Earth's yellow sun, his narrative role, ethical commitments, and symbolic function transcend environmental conditions. Narrative continuity. Once Superman has acted, saved Earth, made moral choices, formed relationships, he has crossed the threshold from latent potential to active identity. That transformation is irreversible in narrative terms. Returning to Krypton, or rather going to a powerless, infusing sun region given Krypton's destruction, doesn't erase the story, it extends it. He is no longer just a Kryptonian with potential. He is the one who was and is Superman. 2. Ethical memory and relational identity. Superman's identity is also shaped by relational memory. The people he saved remember him. He remembers his choices. His ethical framework, shaped on Earth, remains intact. Even without powers, he carries the moral architecture of Superman. Identity here is narrative and ethical, not merely biological or functional. 3. Symbolic permanence. Superman is a symbol, not just a character. Once that symbol is activated, once he becomes a figure of hope, justice, and protection, it cannot be undone by a change in environment. The symbol persists even if the powers do not. Once the role is activated, it becomes part of the character's narrative continuity. The powers may fade, but the role remains. Superman is Superman not because he has powers, but because he became the one who used them in service of others. Let's further review a threshold model of human personhood. Traditional views of personhood often rely on essentialist criteria. Biological kind, for example, Homo sapiens. Cognitive capacities, for example, rationality, self-awareness. Moral status, for example, rights-bearing subject. But these criteria can be static, exclusionary, or insufficient for capturing the full emergence of personhood across diverse human experiences. Instead, consider a threshold model inspired by the Superman analogy. Kind Kryptonian human biological species. Threshold exposure to yellow sun, relational, social, ethical activation. Role Superman, symbolic identity, person, recognized, narrated, ethical self. Latency and activation in human identity. Just as Superman's powers and identity are latent or unrealized until activated by context, human personhood may be. Examples. A newborn has biological humanity, but personhood emerges through care, naming, relational bonding, alongside instantiated powers or function actualization and capacities. A marginalized individual may possess full cognitive and moral capacities, but lack social recognition. Their personhood is suppressed, not absent. This is a person and should be recognized as one. This model resists the idea that personhood is given. Instead, it is activated, narrated, and sustained through thresholds of relationality, memory, becoming, and ethical engagement. Personhood emerges through thresholds, not solely traits or powers. These thresholds are contextual, cultural, and historical. They vary across time, place, and community, but they share a common logic. Personhood is not static, but activated and sustained. It challenges exclusionary definitions of personhood, for example, based on cognition, productivity, or autonomy. It affirms the personhood of those in liminal states: infants, elders, disabled individuals, migrants, the grieving, the forgotten. It reframes ethical care as threshold maintenance, keeping someone within the field of recognition, memory, and relationality. Personhood is not a trait, it is a becoming. It is the arc latent in humanity, storied, powerful, ethical, and persistent. Personhood as a dynamic arc. Biological kind, the human body, origin, the latent powers. 2. Thresholds. Relational, ethical, and narrative power activation, actualized location, emergent. 3. Role. The person, storied, remembered, mourned, loved, a performer of nature to its capacity. Let's ground thresholds in this context of cognitive activation to ethical domain. From latent to luminous, the mind's emergence, its capacity to reflect, anticipate, and narrate, marks a shift from biological substrate to ethical subject. Predictive modeling. When a being begins to simulate futures, assess consequences, and imagine alternatives, it crosses into ethical relevance. The facts that make this so are made significant in virtue of this. Introspective recursion. Self-awareness isn't binary, it unfolds. The recursive loop of "I know that I know" or "I fear what might happen" signals a threshold of personhood. 2. Temporal complexity and narrative self. Time binding. A predictive being doesn't just exist, it projects. It binds past, present, and future into a coherent arc. Narrative agency. The ability to form a story about oneself, I am becoming, I was harmed, I hope, is a threshold of personhood. Memory as moral infrastructure. To remember is to be accountable. To anticipate is to be responsible. These are not just cognitive feats, they are ethical activations. 3. Mind as relational interface. Intersubjective modeling. Predictive beings simulate others. They imagine how they are seen, what others feel, and how their actions ripple. Consent and care. A mind capable of modeling harm and care becomes a candidate for moral consideration and communal trust. Threshold of recognition. When a being can recognize another as a mind when it can mourn, love, or forgive it, performs personhood. 4. Emergence, not essence. No fixed point. The mind doesn't flip on and off at a moment, it simply emerges or is not. As a mind is more than a shock of signals, it is more than a simple reflexive action. It's a continuous state of activating cellular patterns, coherence, resonating, and reverberating with life. Evolves and is formed by it. It layers sensory-motor anticipation, emotional forecasting, symbolic narration. The mind acts as the binding force which holds past, present, and future experiences that are universally unique in a relative and relevant sense. It is the premise of a self-holding state which is decisively numerically its own. A universe within a universe. We might visualize this as a spiral or a bloom. Each layer of introspection and prediction expands ethical relevance. Further, we can ask structural implications. What systems allow or inhibit this emergence? What environments foster introspective, predictive minds? Within the structure implications, we may find relevant divides for the mind and temporal existence which is solely within the womb. This is further contrasted by one which has become causally formed and weaved into a life outside it. Now let's cast ourselves into a different angle of approach, one that starts with the ontological identity of a volleyball, and ask, what of Wilson? Distinguishing between activation of traits and activation of powers. Wilson catalyzes Chuck's emotional survival, but he doesn't possess agency or ethical memory. He's storied, mourned, and named, but not self-aware, not morally engaged. That places him in a liminal zone, symbolically personified but not ethically individuated. Wilson activates certain character traits, companionship, projection, emotional anchoring, but lacks the kind nature of persons, a biological rational one, autonomy, or reciprocal agency. He functions as a pseudo-person, a symbolic figure who crosses relational and narrative thresholds, but not the full arc of ethical or functional personhood. What we must identify still is the turning point. This can be exemplified in the following. Someone can start a race, but that doesn't mean they've finished it. Finishing a race, meanwhile, comes down to the singularity. It is a temporal instant. One may cross the finish line by a hair, yet the body still follows. So then, how can becoming Superman be a threshold? What actions instantiate the act of becoming? When does one truly become? What many want to assert here is a continuation fallacy, just as after completing the drawing of a circle, where is its beginning? In this sense, there is a turning point, an instance of becoming but not yet become. It is emergent and distinctive in an objective sense. This is the what and when of continuation. It is more about maintaining and persisting than it is about finishing form.